All right, let's go ahead and take our knowledge of moles and expand on our knowledge of moles. If you go ahead and turn to your booklet to the page that has this diagram on there, which is page 9 in your booklet, I'm going to go ahead and write the flow chart that's on there, and we're going to use that flow chart for today and the rules for today. So go ahead and look at that, and I'm going to go ahead and put it on the board here. And so here's the flow chart that we learned last class period, or a couple class periods ago. Now if you take a look, we can take grams and we can convert it to moles. We can also go from moles to grams, and we can go from atoms to moles. We can go from moles to atoms, and that's what we learned this last video. What we're going to do now is we are going to learn how to go from grams to atoms and from atoms to grams. Now again, just to clarify, just to reiterate how this flowchart works, is you can start anywhere on this flowchart. You can start with grams, you can start with moles, you can start with atoms, and you can go anywhere. And so you can go forward or backward or whatever. And then these are the first 3 steps to all of these problems. It's really straightforward. The first thing you do is you just write what's given to you. Then what you do is you multiply by some fraction. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put the units you start with on the bottom. So if you're starting with grams, grams go on the bottom. If you're starting with atoms, atoms go on the bottom. And so let's go ahead and take a look at some practice problems. Now this first set of problems, this is not anything new, all right? So this is somewhat of a review. And so we're going to review a little bit, and then we're going to expand on this, all right? So I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly just because we already know how to do them. So let's go ahead and take a look. We have grams, so we're given grams, and it's asking for moles. All right, so we're given grams, it's asking for moles. So if we consider this flowchart here, we're given grams, and it's asking for moles. So we can totally go between grams and moles. So let's go ahead and do this. Step 1 is to write what's given to you. Okay, well, we're given 11.9 grams, and it's grams of aluminum. All right, so we can totally write grams of aluminum here if we want. Then what we want to do is we want to multiply by some fraction. Just to say, we are on page 10 here, so we're on page 10. Now, the third step, all right, is whatever units you start with, put the units you start with on the bottom. And so we're starting with grams, and we put grams on the bottom. All right, and if we take a look at the flow chart, we're going from grams to moles, and we can totally do that. So we're going from grams to moles. Now, what always goes in front of moles? Well, a 1 will always go in front of moles. And when I say a 1 will always go in front of moles, that's within the fraction. So a 1 will always go in front of moles within the fraction. Now, if we take a look at the flow chart here, we're going between grams and moles. So we're going between grams and moles. And look at what it tells us to use. It tells us to use the molar mass, which is on the periodic table. So let's go ahead and use the molar mass on the periodic table. And if we take a look, here's aluminum. And if you look on the periodic table, it is 26.982. Now what I'll say is on your periodic table on the booklet, it says 26.98, and that's totally okay. Some periodic tables go to 3 decimal places, some go to 4, some only go to 2. Yours happens to only go to 2. And so what we want to do is I'll put the one that's on your periodic table. And so we put the 26.98. And so then what we do is we just type this in the calculator and we get our answer. And what we end up with is we're going to go to 2 decimal places for this class. We always go to 2 decimal places, and it's 0.44. And we also have to put the units. Now let's think about this. So the grams here are canceling out, because that's the whole point of putting the grams on the bottom, is to cancel out the units, and we're left with moles right there, and that happens to be our units. So the units we're left with is moles. So we also box our answer and put a smiley face. All right, let's go ahead and go to this next one. So this time we're given moles, and it's asking for grams. Okay, so now we're given moles, and it's asking for grams. And so we have 13.2 moles. So step 1, write what you have. Then you multiply by a fraction. The units you start with go on the bottom. And we're going from moles to grams. And if we take a look at our flow chart, again, we're going between grams and moles. So what do we use? We use the molar mass from the periodic table, which happens to be this number again, because we're still dealing with aluminum. All right, now what always goes in front of moles? A 1. So we do 26.98, and again we are using this number because we're dealing with aluminum. If we were dealing with a different element, we would have a different molar mass. And all we do is we type this in our calculator. And what we will end up with is we will end up with 356.13. The moles cancel out and we're left with grams. And we box it, smiley face. All right, last one. We're given moles. It's asking for atoms. So again, step 1, write what you have. This is what's given, write what's given. Then you multiply by a fraction. Whatever units you start with go on the bottom. And this time, we're going from moles to atoms. And what always goes in front of moles? A 1. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our flow chart here. If you take a look, this time we're going between moles and atoms. And because we're going between moles and atoms, we're going to use Avogadro's number, which is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. And so this is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. Now all we do is type this in our calculator and we will get our answer. And what we end up with is, if you did this correctly, you'll end up with 1.65. However, don't forget to look at the end of the answer where it has E24. And again, E24 is times 10 to the 24. And the moles cancel. We're left with atoms. So we go like that. That is an A. And that's it. So this was review. All right, so we've done this before. Let's go ahead and expand on this. Now again, we're going to draw our mole map here. So we have grams. We can go from grams to moles. And then we go from moles to atoms. We use I'm going to put MM for molar mass here. And then put A and then the pound sign for Avogadro's number. All right. Now in this situation, we're going to learn how to go between grams and atoms because it's a little bit different. It's going to require an extra step. And what I really want to focus on is the fact that you need to set it up to where the units are canceling out. And so you want to set it up where the units cancel out, and you want to do it without putting numbers. So do it without putting numbers. And if you're able to do that, I promise you that you will never ever get the answer wrong. So let's go ahead and take a look at this problem and see what it's asking. So we're given grams, all right, so we're given grams, and it's asking for atoms. And so we're going to go all the way from grams to atoms. And what I will say is the first 3 steps are going to be the same. So step 1, write what's given to you. Multiply by a fraction. The units you start with go on the bottom. So notice how it's the same. We write what's given to us, we multiply by some fraction, the units we start with go on the bottom. However, what's going to be different is we cannot go from grams to atoms directly. We cannot do this. We cannot do this. Instead, if you look at the flow chart, there's a certain order. We need to take our grams and we need to first convert them to moles. And so we need to go from grams to moles. So we cannot go from grams to atoms first. We need to go from grams to moles. Now what I will say is, when you put grams on the bottom here, these grams cancel out. And notice how we went from grams to moles. And if we were to stop here, we would have successfully converted to moles. But the problem is not asking for moles, it's asking for atoms. And so what we now need to do is we need to take our moles and convert them to atoms. And the way you do that is you do a second fraction. So essentially this is going to be a 2-fraction problem. Now let's think about this. Grams are here and we put grams on the bottom to cancel out the grams. Well, where do we need to put the moles to cancel out the moles? Do we put it on the top or do we put it on the bottom? Again, where do we put the moles to cancel them out? Well, the answer is on the bottom, because when you put them on the bottom here, they cancel. And so again, it's all about canceling out your units. And so now what we can do is we can go from moles to atoms. And we end up with this setup here. Now, what I want to point out, very important, and I keep saying this because this is going to be something that is very important for the whole year. So let's go ahead and make sure we get it down now so that later on we can have an easier time with chemistry. Notice how I've set it up without putting in numbers. Very important. Set it up without putting in numbers. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm canceling out the units. All I'm doing is I'm setting it up to where the units cancel out, because if you cancel out the units, you will end up with the right setup. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put in our numbers after we've set them up, after we set up correctly. And again, what always goes in front of moles? Very important. What always goes in front of moles? Well, a 1 will always go in front of moles. So we can put a 1 in front of both of those moles. Now right here, what fraction are we going between? What are we going between? Well, we're going between grams and moles. So we're going between these two right here. And I realize it's starting to get a big mess here. So we're going between grams and moles. And what do we use? We use the molar mass from the periodic table. So let's go ahead and take a look at the periodic table for sodium to figure out the molar mass. Sodium happens to be right here. And your periodic table says 22.99. This one says 22.990. So let's go ahead and do, see here, 22.99. All right, well, what are we going between here? Well, we're going between moles and atoms. So we're going between moles and atoms. And so we're going between moles and atoms. And what do we use? We use Avogadro's number. And Avogadro's number is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. And so now we have our setup. Now all we need to do is type it in the calculator to get the right answer. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, and what we end up with is 4.95 times 10 to the 24. So make sure you're able to type that in your calculator and get that answer there. Again, what we do is we take this number, we multiply it by the top numbers, and then we divide it by the bottom numbers. Now there's one more thing we need to do, and we need to make sure that we write our units for our answer. Notice how the grams cancel. Notice how the moles cancel. And what are we left with? We're left with atoms. And what we end up doing is we box it. And we put our smiley face. All right, let's go ahead and do another example. Notice how this time we're given atoms. Okay, so we're starting with atoms. And now it's asking for grams. And so this time we're starting with atoms going to grams. And the question I'm going to ask you is, can you go directly from atoms to grams? Can you go directly between the two? And the answer is no, you cannot. We have to take the atoms, and we first need to go to moles, and then we need to go from moles to grams. So this is going to be another two-fraction problem. But the steps are the same. So step 1 is write what you have. You have 7.29 times 10 to the 23 atoms of calcium. Then we multiply by some fraction, and the units we start with always go on the bottom because then they cancel out. All right, so here we're starting with atoms. Where do we need to go to first? Well, we need to go to moles first. So that's what we're going to end up going to first. We're going to go to moles. And again, the atoms cancel out. We're left with moles. And if we were to stop here, we would have successfully converted it to moles. Except we don't want to stop there. We want to go all the way to grams. And so we need to multiply by another fraction. And again, where do we put these moles to cancel them out? We put them on the bottom. And they cancel. And now we can go from moles to grams. What always goes in front of moles? A 1. Now, in this first fraction, notice what we're going between. We're going between atoms and moles. All right, we're going between atoms and moles. Okay, so we're going between these two right here. So what do we use? There we go. We use Avogadro's number, which is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. All right, well now we're going between grams and moles here. All right, so when we go between grams and moles, we use the molar mass on the periodic table. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the periodic table. So here we go, calcium right there. It's 40.078. I think yours says 40.08. So we're going to put 40.08. And there we go. That's our setup. All we need to do is type this in the calculator, and we will be able to get the answer. But real quick, just to recap, notice how we set the units up first, and then we went back and filled in the numbers. So let's go ahead and type this in the calculator. And if you type this in the calculator correctly, you should get 48.53. And again, we want to put our units. The units that we're left with are grams, so it's going to be grams. It's grams of calcium. All right, let's go ahead and do one more. Here we go. Pause the video, set this one up, try to see if you can do it on your own. And then when you are done, play the video and see if you were able to get the right answer. All right, let's go ahead and do this particular practice problem. And so what I'm going to do is, we don't have the flow chart right in front of us, but we can go ahead and write it down as we go. So we have grams, and it's asking for atoms. So we're given grams, and again, we can go from grams to moles, and we go from moles to atoms. And so, again, if we're given grams and we're asking for atoms, we cannot go directly between them. We cannot do that. We have to first go from grams to moles, and then moles to atoms. So this will be a two-fraction problem, but it's very straightforward, just like the other one. So let's go ahead and do this. So step one is write what you have. You have 87.5 grams. You then multiply by some fraction, and whatever you start with goes on the bottom. These first three steps are going to be the same for every single type of gram mole atom problem. It does not matter where you're starting and where you're going. So these first three steps should be very straightforward. Now notice how we're starting with grams, and we first need to go to moles. What ends up happening is, because the grams are on the bottom here, they cancel out. We're left with moles, but we don't want moles. If we did want moles, we could stop here. If we were to stop here, we would successfully convert to moles, but we don't want moles. We need to go one more step to atoms. And so we put the moles on the bottom here to cancel them out, and now we can go from moles to atoms. So again, you set your units up, and then you fill in the numbers. What always goes in front of moles? A 1. What do you use when you go between grams and moles? What do you use? Well, you use the molar mass. Here's a trick to remember that. Molar mass has the word mass in it, and grams is the units for mass. So molar mass, grams. And again, the molar mass is the atomic mass on the periodic table. So whenever we're going from grams to moles, we use the atomic mass on the periodic table. So here's carbon right here. So if we take a look at carbon, it's 12.011. Your periodic table says 12.01. All right. Now, when we go between moles and atoms, atoms starts with an A, you then use Avogadro's number, which is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. All we do is type in our calculator, and let's take a look at what we get. We end up with 4.38 times 10 to the 24th atoms. And we box it, we put our smiley face, This guy's looking at you. All right. Maybe he has some bushy eyebrows as well. All right, so that's it. It's just like the one-step problems, except for we're using two fractions. And again, we're setting up our units to cancel them out. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I hope you have a fantastic day.